So yesterday, there was a lot of media freaking out. There were Democrat leaders running around decrying Donald Trump as a mean old bully while hailing poor Zelensky as a poor, battered, helpless leader of Ukraine who just wanted the U.S. to protect his country. And after all of that, the chief of NATO has stepped in and said to Zelensky in diplomatic speech, "What crack are you smoking? Get back to talking to Donald Trump." This is an article from the UK Daily Mail citing a BBC breaking news article. They write, NATO chief issues sharp warning to Zelensky after car crash. Trump talks. NATO chief Mark Rutte has said he told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that he needs to find a way to restore his relationship with President Donald Trump after Friday's White House clash. He said it is important that President Zelensky finds a way to restore his relationship with the American president and with the senior American leadership team. And he described the meeting at the White House as unfortunate, which is a very nice way to put it, I suppose. Now, Rutte's dire warning to the wartime president comes as Zelensky duked it out with Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance in the Oval Office over the conditions of a possible ceasefire deal with Russia. Tempers flared on all sides, with Trump threatening to abandon Ukraine completely if Zelensky didn't agree with his peace terms. Well, he and Vance, he being Donald Trump, also repeatedly accused Zelensky of not being grateful for America's sustained military support of Ukraine, which has totaled to roughly $100 billion, according to one recent estimate, and that figure is incorrect. It is $175 billion. But whatever. Now, Zelensky would go on to show pictures of the devastation of his country to Trump while he argued that he had thanked the American people for their aid. The yelling match was unlike anything ever seen publicly in the Oval Office, and it played out on TV screens across the world. Now, what also is interesting is that prior to the NATO chief spanking Zelensky publicly, Zelensky had also put the feelers out there saying, hey, I still want the deal to go through. Let's make it happen. This is from the New York Post. This was published this morning. And it's titled, Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky says he still wants U.S. mineral deal after explosive Trump talks. He said, we are ready to sign the minerals agreement, and it will be the first step towards security guarantees. But it is not enough. We need more than just that. A ceasefire without security guarantees is dangerous for Ukraine. We have been fighting for 3 years, and Ukrainian people need to know that America is on our side. Now, I don't want to get into all the minutiae of the play-by-play back and forth yesterday. Instead, I want to focus on the bigger picture here. Now, this is a work in progress, a theory of mine as to why precisely Donald Trump did a KO on the Ukrainian president yesterday. So again, this is just my theory, but hear me out. Russia is, of course, by far the greater evil between these two countries. And we bear some responsibility for this situation. If we go back in time and look at Bill Clinton in the 90s, he made a deal with the Ukrainians that, hey, if you get rid of your nukes, we'll give you a security guarantee. But when Russia ended up invading Crimea, President Obama, who was in charge at the time, dropped the ball. He looked the other way. He didn't want to stop Russia from stealing Crimea. And so we did nothing. Now, Obama, to be fair, was also a weak president. He was all about America is bad, and he liked to apologize for us being ourselves to the rest of the world. He wasn't really a wartime president. So this was bad. And then, of course, under Biden, there was the second war with Russia, which all of this we all know. Now, the problem is for Donald Trump and America is Ukraine has been less than friendly to us for some time now. Despite the U.S. giving Ukraine $175 billion in support for their war effort against Russia, Ukraine routinely goes up against our interests at the UN. For example, this is another article from the New York Post discussing this. They write, despite receiving hundreds of billions of dollars in critical military aid since Russia invaded in 2022, Ukraine has made a habit of rejecting U.S. interests at the United Nations, according to a review of State Department data by the Post. They write, many of Ukraine's actions have been in direct opposition to the United States' position in powder keg regions, such as the Middle East. For example, just days after Hamas terrorists invaded Israel on October 7th, slaughtering over 1,000 innocent civilians, the UN passed Resolution ES 1021 calling for an immediate and sustained humanitarian truce, which was stupid and ridiculous. Of course, Israel wouldn't accept that. And the US knew this. So we then led a bloc of 14 nations to oppose this resolution. Ukraine didn't back us up on that. And they didn't back us up again in a follow-up resolution demanding a ceasefire in December of 2023, which was also opposed by the US. Ukraine said, we're not helping you here. Now, in November of 2023, the United Nations also voted to demand that the United States lift its trade embargo on Cuba. And the only one that backed us up on this was Israel. Once again, Ukraine left us high and dry. Now, Jim Hansen, an international affairs consultant in Washington, D.C., told the Post, I think it is disgraceful that a country that is so reliant on the largesse of the United States to keep them viable as a nation state refuses to back our plays in the United Nations and shows that they would rather kowtow to somebody else when we are the ones that are keeping them safe. So, Ukraine routinely thumbs their noses at the United States. They like to stick us in the eye when it comes to matters that our government holds as important. They don't back us up even though we are constantly helping them out. And that doesn't fly with somebody like Donald Trump, who is an America First kind of president. He prioritizes our interests as a country. He has made it clear that he despises our previous leaders, calling them stupid for showering nations that hate us publicly with financial support. And Zelensky falls into that category. He treats the US with great disrespect, constantly. Donald Trump has made it clear that he doesn't want the US drawn into more wars, while Zelensky is trying to use the peace deal to draw us into any future war with Russia. That's what the security guarantees are all about. And Donald Trump wants none of that. A direct war with Russia could lead to nuclear holocaust. So, this then leads me to my theory on what happened yesterday. Donald Trump's decision to publicly castigate Zelensky in the Oval Office, turning it into a global spectacle, wasn't a random outburst at all. President Trump, I believe, is using this opportunity to establish America's dominance with the rest of the world. We are the world's superpower, and Trump is making it clear that we are not to be trifled with. Trump thrives on public dominance. Think of his public debates, his rallies. The Oval Office clash was a performance not just for Zelensky, but for the global audience as well. By giving Zelensky the boot from the Oval Office, Trump sent a clear signal to the entire world that America is in control of our own destiny, and we will help those who want to be grateful to the US for our aid. And we are more likely to help you if you want to reciprocate our generosity. So what Trump did here was all about raw optics. He took a wartime leader and he humbled him with America's first. And Trump's take it or leave it stance will force Zelensky to eventually return to the table hat in hand. Because if he doesn't, he will face the wrath of both his allies in Europe and the other possibility of his dwindling hope for success against the dark threat that is Russia. Trump's aim is to corner the Ukrainian president into accepting terms favorable to ending the war quickly, which probably means ceding some territory to Russia or neutrality. And by the way, this all goes back to Trump's campaign promise to resolve the Ukraine war fast. He wants to neutralize the Russian threat without direct confrontation. Trump berating Zelensky, treating him like an unruly teenager, serves as a back-channel message to Moscow, to Putin directly. He is likely nudging Putin towards the table without concessions up front, which is crucial for Donald Trump to get the best deal for the United States here. And that is why he's using chaos as a tool. This is vintage Trump. It is loud, it is messy, and it is unscripted. He constantly interrupted Zelensky, repeatedly dismissing his warnings about Putin's track record, and he used hyperbolic language like gambling with millions of lives to shame Zelensky. And J.D. Vance played the perfect tag team. He amplified Donald Trump's attacks. He constantly questioned Zelensky's credibility. And by Donald Trump canceling the press conference and the mineral deal, underscored that Trump was serious. He was making this clear to the rest of the world. If there's no compliance, there are no rewards. End of discussion. Trump's chaos isn't a bug. It is actually a feature of who he is. Trump uses public humiliation all the time. Remember Kim Jong-un's Rocket Man phase? constantly insulting and berating the leader of North Korea, telling him our rockets are bigger. That is how Trump deals. He likes to break his opponent's will and then negotiate from a position of strength. Now you might be wondering, well, why would he want to be so hard though on our allies? But the reality is, as I've already pointed out, Ukraine hasn't always necessarily been a good friend to the US in recent decades. And as for our Western allies, well, their friendship has been fading as well. Europe is well on the march to a Marxist totalitarian nightmare. There is an evil that is reaching dictatorial control over their citizens now, including thought police in places like the UK and Germany, a darkness that hasn't seen so much power since the fall of the USSR or perhaps even World War II. And as for Ukraine, Zelensky has ruled over his citizens with an iron fist. He has crushed freedoms at every turn. Ever since the war with Russia began, Zelensky has used this opportunity to declare martial law on his citizens. And sure, we could talk about cancelled elections, but that was done legally, as Ukraine's constitution forbids them to happen during wartime. But in my opinion, what is much more dark and troubling is his moves against all freedoms of speech within his country. For example, Zelensky has obliterated the media. He has nationalized TV channels and shut down what he calls pro-Russian outlets, arguing that they are security threats. There have been many claims of jailed dissenters and political opponents mysteriously disappearing. Now, of course, it is hard to know exactly what is propaganda and what isn't, but what we do know is that Zelensky has arrested a pro-Russian oligarch in his country and charged him with treason, not just dissent. And he didn't just stop there. Zelensky has also gone after the church in his own country. He has targeted the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, or the UOC, which is historically linked to Moscow's patriarchy, accusing them of being a Russian spy nest. And he passed laws in 2022 and 2023 to restrict their activities. And many priests have been detained with claims of violence against religious leaders, although the veracity of the violence and the reports remain unverified. The Ukrainian state has claimed that it's just rooting out collaborators with Russia. And so over 60 UOC clergy have faced sanctions as of 2023. And on top of all of this, Zelensky, before Donald Trump got back into office, has been stubborn about no peace talks. Back in 2022, he signed a decree ruling out talks with Putin after Russia annexed 4 regions, calling it impossible. His line was no deal unless Ukraine's 1991 borders, including Crimea, are restored, which of course would never happen unless Russia lost the war. Putin can't afford to give up Crimea. He would be disgraced in his own country if he let that happen. And Zelensky knows this, and he has effectively ensured that the war could not end, which then brings me back to Donald Trump. His actions at the Oval Office serve as a way to bring Zelensky back to reality. Zelensky's gotten a big head over the last couple of years. He's been put on a pedestal. Western leaders have spent years building Zelensky up as a wartime icon, a Churchill 2.0. He has been showered with standing ovations in Congress, glowing profiles in news outlets like Time magazine, which crowned him Person of the Year. Biden called him a historic figure. And they all hail Zelensky as democracy's savior. And so Trump has flipped the table over. He is signaling not just to Russia or China or to the Ukraine, but to everyone, allies included. America will not play the same game here. Not anymore. The US is not going to be the same old reliable old ally just doling out cash and moral lectures. We are a wild card that demands respect. Now, Russia is the true threat here. That much is true. Putin's war machine shows it every day. But Trump's lens seems to be wider here. I believe it is likely that he is eyeing Europe's hypocrisy. Billions of dollars for Ukraine, while their own borders strain or energy prices soar, they treat their people like garbage. By slamming Zelensky, he is indirectly telling NATO, fix your own mess, I am not your ATM. All of this is less about denying Russia's danger and more about reasserting US dominance over a coalition he sees as faltering. The mineral deal tease rare earths for peace, dangles a carrot, but only if the world plays by his rules. Now, whether or not in the end Donald Trump's strategy will pay off, only time can tell. But something tells me that we will not have to wait long to find out.